Hello everyone, and welcome to the second episode of Undertale Track Analysis, a series where I will be dissecting, deconstructing, and analyzing all 101 tracks in the Undertale OST. While it's not necessary for you to have watched the first episode, where I analyzed Once Upon a Time, I would recommend you do so in order to learn more about the series as a whole and familiarize yourself with the style of analysis I'll be conducting. I'll leave a link in the description that will take you to the video. Anyway, I've decided I'm not going to be analyzing these tracks in chronological order, and instead analyze them simply based on personal preference. So in this episode, I'll be skipping from Once Upon a Time all the way to Bergentrückung and Asgore, the two main themes of the King of the Underground Asgore Dreamer. As always, there will be spoilers in this video, so make sure you've beaten the game before you continue watching. So let's start things off with Bergentrückung, the track that plays before Asgore's actual fight. Before we get into any sort of musical analysis, I think it's important to discuss the meaning of the track's title. Bergentrückung is a German phrase, which, when literally translated, means mountain rapture in English. However, it's usually translated as King of the Mountain for convenience. Now, I have had some native German speakers claim that this is nonsense, and since I don't speak the language, I can't be sure. However, typing Bergentrückung into Google Translate does yield King of the Mountain, so it's possible that Toby Fox just used Google Translate to come up with the name, rather than checking a more reliable source. And just to notice, I have no idea if I'm pronouncing the word Bergentrückung correctly, so feel free to laugh at me in the comments if I'm not. Now, the significance of this title is twofold. First, there's the literal application, which is that Asgore is a king who lives in a mountain. Simple enough. However, the second implication is where things get interesting. King in the Mountain is the name of a literary trope, which refers to a royal character who has been sealed away or imprisoned, usually underneath a mountain, emerging from hiding and saving his people when they need him the most. Probably the most notable example of this trope is King Arthur, who is prophesied to return when England is at its darkest hour. Now, given the name of this track, the question that comes to mind is Asgore an example of a literary King of the Mountain? How you decide to answer that question says a lot about how you view the character of Asgore. He definitely checks the imprisoned under a mountain box, but what's left up to interpretation is whether Asgore is really saving his people when they need him the most. On one hand, he genuinely has his subjects' best intentions at heart, and is willing to compromise his own morals and peace of mind to give them a chance at freedom. On the other hand, his decision to stay behind the barrier, meekly waiting for human children to fall underground, rather than taking the matter into his own hands, could be seen as evidence that Asgore isn't as heroic as the title of the track would lead you to believe. It's an interesting way to call Asgore's character into question, and I think it serves to highlight the ambiguous and rather tragic nature of this king very well. One last question persists regarding the track title. Why is it in German? It's the only Undertale track whose name isn't in English, and it seems somewhat of a random choice. But if there's one thing I've learned from playing Undertale, it's that Toby Fox is never random in his choices. I think the reason why German was chosen is that the King in the Mountain trope seems to be most prevalent in Germanic folklore, with the majority of kings in the mountain originating from somewhere in Western Europe. Given that a lot of other theory crafters have deduced that the most probable location of Mount Ebott is somewhere in Europe, this also fits with the presumed location of Undertale. This is going to be the only time I recommend you watch game theory, but I think it was the Culture Shock series that did an episode on where Mount Ebott is probably located, and it's an interesting watch. You should go check it out. Now, on to the actual musical analysis. Bergentrückung is a relatively simple track that consists of two melodies, one high and one low. During the first half of the track, both voices progressively go down in pitch, eventually setting on the minor tonic chord, a stable, agreeable chord that makes harmonic sense. And you can hear it here. And if you want a visual representation, you can have these in the tutorial. Now, I won't really get into too much detail on what a tonic chord is, because that delves into not really that complex music theory, but it will be beyond the realm of what some people are comfortable about talking about. So, basically, the tonic chord is the most stable chord. It's this chord that is the first note in the scale or the key that the piece is in, and it's basically the starting point of any sort of harmony. So, I think this downward motion is meant to represent both the player and Asgore acknowledging their fate, this very rueful realization of the battle that's about to take place, and the shared chord at the end symbolizes they both agree on what must happen next. If you'll notice, the lower voice plays these two notes, because a chord consists of 3 or more notes, and the lower voice plays these 2 notes of the chord, while the higher voice plays the third and last note. They're agreeing on choosing this chord, essentially. So the second half of the track then starts the same way as the first, with the same dun, 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 but this time it rises upwards, with both voices incorporating eighth notes into their melodies. The higher voice even adds in a couple grace notes. An eighth note is faster than the quarter notes that the first half of the track was playing, and the grace notes are even faster than that, so. As you can see, the second half of the track ends higher than the first one, and if you want to hear how it actually sounds in the game. So, the melody once again ends with another minor tonic chord, but this time, the tonic note, the first note of the scale, ends with being played by the upper voice, which gives it even more stability, which makes it even sound even more final and climactic. As you can see, the higher voice is playing D, which is the tonic note of the key that the piece is in. So, both the player and Asgore are rising up to this challenge, both literally and metaphorically, and the usage of faster notes shows their readiness for the upcoming battle. Also of note is the slight reverb effect placed in the notes. It makes it sound like each note is played twice, if you need to be shown that. So if you listen carefully, you can kind of hear like da 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 instead of just da da da. So this helps to set up the atmosphere of the fight. The two of you are fighting next to the barrier, and the addition of the effect makes it sound as if the track is echoing throughout the cave, lending the battle a nice sense of scale. So with this track, the reluctant yet inevitable tone of the battle is set, with both combatants unwilling to back down despite their desire to avoid harming each other. So, on to Asgore. The title of this track is much simpler than Bergentrückung, as it's probably a joke about how Asgore is really bad at naming things. More worth noting is the fact that this is one of the few tracks in Undertale where the title is written in all caps. The only other ones are Nigga, Core, and Megalovania. Nigga is capitalized for emphasis to fit with the knight's character, while Core is capitalized because that just seems to be the way the location is written, with characters always referring to it in all caps in the dialogue. Asgore and Megalovania, however, stick out. Asgore is referred to in all caps several times, but not always, and the word Megalovania isn't ever said by anyone. I think the purpose of this capitalization is to emphasize the finality and climactic nature of the battles these tracks accompany. Sans' battle serves as the last battle in Genocide, while Asgore's battle is supposed to serve as the last battle in Neutral, which only serves to make Omega Flowey's surprise appearance all the more shocking, a topic I'll discuss more in depth when I get to Your Best Nightmare. Worth noting is the predominant use of chiptune in this track. If you recall from my Once Upon a Time analysis, I mentioned how the farther you go in Undertale's soundtrack, the more quote-unquote real instruments are added to create the illusion of falling into the game. However, I think the usage of chiptune is more than that. Essentially, chiptune is used in the track whenever the game seems to be nothing more than a regular NES-style JRPG, while real instruments are used whenever something occurs that shatters that illusion. Basically, at the risk of sounding pretentious, real instruments are used whenever Undertale transcends the boundaries of what a game should be, which is typically when something extremely emotional, for example, the scenes that accompany Undertale, Hopes and Dreams, and his theme, or shocking or meta, like the scenes that accompany Your Best Nightmare and Megalovania, happens. In this case, the usage of chiptune is a very strategic use by Toby Fox. In many ways, Asgore's battle is the most traditional out of all the battles in Undertale. There's no mercy mechanics, nor any way to talk your way out of the battle like in the rest of Undertale. All you can do is fight. In a way, this simplicity just makes the battle that much more heartbreaking. In terms of story and emotional depth, it's one of the most complex battles in the entire game, yet in terms of gameplay, it's agonizingly straightforward, and the lack of real instruments just drives home that point. Of course, as mentioned before, the relative normalcy of the battle only serves to make the genre-breaking nature of Omega Flowey's battle that much more unexpected. So, the track opens by repeating the opening notes of Bergentrückung, layering on a firm bass line to signify that the fight has truly started. However, the track is quick to change things up, introducing a new melody that obeys a different rhythm than Bergentrückung. The time for introductions is over. If you just want to compare that to what Bergentrückung sounds like. So, the new rhythm is still rather slow, with no 16th notes, showing that even though the fight has started, Asgore isn't ready to go all out just yet. The opening notes of the Bergentrückung are then played again after this melody finishes. And they're preceded by a new melody, which is slightly different from the previous one. I'll play them side by side again for comparison. Sorry. So, the opening notes of Bergentrückung are sort of meant to represent a sense of stability, a sense of agreement. Asgore still hasn't committed himself to this battle because he's still lingering on the introduction. He's still not past that opening point. However, the bass line then halts as a new sequence of opening notes is played, which lends them an increased sense of importance. They sound a lot. It's a departure from the original Bergentrückung. I keep pronouncing it differently each time. Bergentrückung opening notes, and it's sort of supposed to pose the question: has Asgore made his decision yet? So a longer, more complex melody follows, which is longer, louder, and goes higher than the others. But at the end, it retreats to the safety of the tonic chord, and the opening notes of Bergentrückung reappear. Asgore is still indecisive. If you want to see a... Oh yeah, it's over here. If you want to see a visual representation of that, you can check out the synthesia tutorial. So this is still rather slow, even though it's a new melody. And this is basically the same thing, except that these two notes are different. These are different opening notes, and then this melody goes to higher lengths than the other one, but it ends with that same tonic chord that closed out Bergentrückung. So no progress has been made, basically. So the first 20 seconds or so of the track are repeated, and it's meant to symbolize that Asgore is once again trying to ready himself for this task. This time he succeeds. The complex melody ends the same way as it did before, but rather than return to the opening notes of Bergentrückung, it transitions to the next section of the song, and the fight is underway. So yeah, instead of playing dun, 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 again it goes dun, dun, and then it moves on to the Heartache section of the track, which is probably the most recognizable leitmotif that the track uses. On the surface, this seems like a relatively simple usage of the leitmotif. Asgore and Toriel used to be married, so it would make sense that the two themes would be connected. However, I think there's more to it than that. If you listen closely, you can hear that the rhythm of the leitmotif is different in Asgore than it is in Heartache. In Heartache, all the notes are of equal length, while in Asgore's version, the two notes are held longer than the rest. I'll play Heartache for comparison. And then Asgore's. So Heartache goes da 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 da, but Asgore's goes da 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 dun dun da 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 dun. You'll notice that it lingers on that one note. So I'll get more in depth into what the Heartache leitmotif means when I actually analyze the track itself, but it basically represents Toriel's unwillingness to cause you harm, and it plays in the background of the track, while the more dramatic and emotional orchestral melodies represent her desire to stop you regardless. This unwillingness to cause you harm is musically represented by the melody's insistent nature. It plays once, and then it plays again, this time with a different bass note, almost sounding like Toriel is pleading with you and trying to convince you to stay in any way possible. And again, the visual representation of that. Notice that it plays once with the G, with this note, the G flat being the bass note, and then it plays the F as the bass note, being the only note that's changed. She's trying, she's just trying every single option she can to convince you not to leave, but obviously it's not working. Anyway, in Asgore's case, this unwillingness to harm you is made even more obvious by this lingering on the notes. It's a literal representation of the character's unwillingness to continue the fight. And we're going to have to skip forward a little bit. If you're familiar with how synthesia works, these notes that are longer than these other notes, like these two, show that those notes are longer in length. So the track is literally like stalling. It's stuck on those notes before moving forward. So it shows that Asgore doesn't want to harm you, but he's forced to continue regardless. So the leitmotif then intensifies, and it adds faster drums and changes the sound file to something different from Heartache, noticeably more forceful. So if you'll listen to what it sounds like in Asgore right here, and then compare it to the sound font in Heartache, you'll notice that it sounds a lot more aggressive. It sounds a lot more determined, for a lack of a better word. So the melody and leitmotif are still the same as before, signifying that Asgore still bears you no ill will, but the intensification of the leitmotif shows that he must carry on fighting you regardless. It's not his choice. Let's skip forward a little bit here. Okay, so the track takes a moment to collect itself here by imitating another melody from Heartache, once again putting its own little twist on it. And I'll play the two for comparison right now. Whoops. So, in a Heartache, the beginning of this melody, which I just played, is always played using strings, which makes it stand out from the rest of the track, and its grandeur and its passion. The rest of it is mostly 8-bit chiptune noises, but this is in strings. This stands out. It's meant to symbolize Toriel's aforementioned determination to stop you in spite of her love for you. In Asgore's case, on the other hand, the melody is played with the same chiptune sound font as the rest of the track, and it takes on a much more forlorn, regretful tone. Asgore's resolve is weakening, and this moment is him questioning whether he can still go on. But the answer to that question comes quickly as the melody strengthens and grows louder and more determined. Right here. And if you want a comparison to how that sounds in Heartache, so interestingly enough, this is the opposite of what the melody does in Heartache. The melody begins with intensity and continues with that same intensity until halfway through, where the melody is played with a flute-like instrument. I'll play it again for convenience. That little segment right there. I'll get more into detail in later episodes about the significance of the flute in Undertale soundtrack, but it basically represents love and kindness. So it's interrupted by that flute-like instrument playing the melody before returning to that former level of intensity. In this case, Toriel's moment of hesitation appears midway through the melody, while Asgore's takes place at the start. This, in and of itself, doesn't seem very significant, but I think it's important in establishing the parallels between these two battles, since Asgore and Toriel's battles are connected not just by musical similarities, but also gameplay and plot similarities. Both characters have no real desire to harm you, but both are motivated to do so out of concern for others. In Toriel's case, her concern is for you, while Asgore's concern is for his people. Asgore's battle in terms of gameplay is the antithesis of Toriel's. While Toriel's battle teaches you that mercy is a viable option no matter what, Asgore forces you to accept that sometimes fighting is the only way out. Toriel is the first boss battle that you face, while Asgore is supposed to be the last, which, again, makes Omega Flowey's appearance all the more surprising. And it's a well-known fact that the attack patterns of Asgore's battle are almost exactly the same as Toriel's. So in this way, Asgore and Toriel's battles both mirror and oppose each other, and I think the slight differences in the leitmotifs they both use is a great musical representation of that duality. So, moving on, throughout the track there has been an atmosphere of reluctant determination. Many elements of the track emphasize the desire to stop fighting while still pressing on with intensity regardless. However, the tone of the track drastically shifts with the introduction of the determination leitmotif. If you want a comparison to how determination itself sounds in comparison to Asgore's. So, the determination leitmotif, due to its purpose as the game over theme, is meant to invoke feelings of melancholy and tragedy, but also motivate players to keep trying and, of course, stay determined. In this case, it's no different. The ever-present drums and bass line die away, leaving nothing but the quiet, subdued notes of a piano, a momentary glimpse into Asgore's true, caring nature. It's almost as if, through the incorporation of this leitmotif, Asgore himself is telling the player to stay determined. It's heavily implied that Asgore somehow knows about the player's ability to reset based on his reaction to the talk action. So I don't think it's a stretch to say that him using the game over music in his own battle theme is his way of reminding the player that every time they've died, it's been his voice that's been urging them to never give up, and he's still rooting for you even when you're fighting against him. It's a strange method of encouragement, but musically speaking, it makes a lot of sense. Also, the usage of the only real instrument in the track underscores the glimmer of hope that this leitmotif provides. The player is reminded of the emphasis on forgiveness and mercy that distinguishes Undertale from other JRPGs, and is led to believe that maybe, just maybe, a peaceful resolution to this battle can be found. The leitmotif is played again, this time with a chiptune rendition layered over the piano version. This serves not only to make the connection to the original Determination track more obvious, since that track consisted of chiptune sounds only, but also as a sad reminder that said peaceful resolution isn't possible based on how the rest of the battle is went. This little moment of tranquility and hope is then shattered as the leitmotif progresses and the drums and bass line are reintroduced. The piano is gone, and as was the case with the Heartache leitmotif, the Determination leitmotif has been tweaked slightly, changing its tone and purpose. While both Determination and Asgore's usage of the leitmotif involves modulation into a different key, that probably sounds like gibberish to someone who doesn't know music theory, but basically they change from one scale to another, essentially. It changes the mood of the piece. The Determination leitmotif differs from Asgore's usage of the leitmotif, in that the notes in Asgore's usage diverge, while in Determination, the leitmotif essentially ends and begins in a lower key. Asgore simply picks up and grows more and more intense until it loops around and plays again. For a comparison, you can listen to this. Skip forward to that part of the song. Whoops. So if you'll notice, the inclusion of this modulation in the Determination track is meant to symbolize the shift away from the disheartenment that the player feels upon dying. It's the track's way of telling the player that it's okay that you just died, but now's the time to pick up the pieces and try again. The melody becomes more grounded, wandering around the keyboard less and instead focusing on whatever obstacle the player has just died to. Visual representation right here. So you'll notice that this is the first section of Determination, and it's pretty scattered, but this one's a lot more centralized in where it's going. So in Asgore, the modulation serves much the same purpose, but the divergent notes make this section of the leitmotif sound much more aggressive, as you'll probably have noted when I played it. The melody retains that focused and steadfast tone that characterized it in Determination, but it now begins to reach notes higher than Determination ever reached, and also mostly keeps the melody in rapid 16th notes, rather than the slower quarter notes that intersperse Determination's melody. Here's a visual representation of that. There's a lot of shorter notes in there, and that really emphasizes that this darker twist on the Determination leitmotif. Asgore is staying determined, just like you do when you die, but he's doing that in order to accomplish something he doesn't actually want to do. And the more forceful version of this leitmotif is indicative of this darker, more tragic idea. Now, one last leitmotif makes its appearance at the very end of the track, the Undying leitmotif. It can be a bit difficult to detect, So if you need help hearing it, I'll leave a link to both Jacob the Quiz Guy's leitmotif video and my own video demonstration. I'll play it right now. Right here. Now, I and many others call this leitmotif the Undyne leitmotif, as nearly every track it appears in is related to Undyne in some way, but I think a more fitting name for it would be the Honor leitmotif. I say this because A, Undyne already has her own leitmotif, which appears in the track named after her. If you're curious as to what that leitmotif is, I'll play it right now. It's the melody that's played in this track. This right here. I'll get more into that melody when it's relevant, when we analyze the tracks relating to Undyne, but essentially that's the Undyne leitmotif. This is not. So, also, the inclusion of the Honor leitmotif in Asgore indicates to me that this leitmotif, this one right here, oh shit, that leitmotif isn't exclusive to just her. Sure, its most notable usage is in Spear of Justice, which I'll discuss in further detail when we get there. But overall, I think the leitmotif is to do more with the concepts of honor and duty than Undyne as a character. The Honor leitmotif is composed of the first 5 notes of the key it's in. It doesn't jump around the keyboard and mess around with minor modes, sticking to the 5 simplest notes in the scale, which I will demonstrate right here. Pay attention to these notes. So this gives it the effect of sounding down-to-earth and soldierly, and its debut in Undyne, where all the notes are of the same length, makes it sound almost like a march, and which furthers that soldierly impression. Spear of Justice has as much fun with the simple melody as it can, elongating certain notes while rushing through others. This lends the rhythm and the melody a much more adventurous and unbound spirit. Undyne is fighting out of honor and duty to her king, but she also just clearly enjoys fighting. And if you want to see what that looks like, same notes, but drastically different rhythm, which makes it actually makes it a lot trickier for people to figure out that it's the same leitmotif. Anyway, what does this inclusion of the leitmotif in Asgore lend to the track, then? Obviously, Asgore, just like Undyne, feels a great sense of duty towards his people, with that sense of duty being the entire reason he's fighting. Its inclusion at the end of the track, right after that burst of determination and willpower represented by the determination leitmotif's modulation, serves as one final reminder to himself and to you why he must continue fighting. The rhythm of this leitmotif is once again changed in this incorporation, with some notes held longer than others. However, unlike Spear of Justice, no notes are rushed through. The longer notes are dotted eighth notes, while the shorter notes are regular eighth notes. Had Toby Fox wanted to create that impression of rushing through the notes, he would have added some 16th notes like he did in Spear of Justice. By elongating some of the notes without compromising the speed of the others, the track establishes one final time the reluctance that Asgore is experiencing throughout the fight. It's not a soldierly march like Undyne, nor is it an adventurous romp like Spear of Justice. It's an honor-bound and duty-bound desire to move forward and keep fighting that he's held to because of the promise he made to his people. So, by incorporating and tweaking a number of seemingly unconnected leitmotifs, the track Asgore is able to perfectly encapsulate the complex emotional journey that Asgore's battle provides. It establishes the contrast between Asgore's own desires and the promise he made to his people, emphasizes the similarities and differences that Toriel and Asgore's battles share, and overall tinges the battle with that melancholy, regretfully determined atmosphere that's so memorable and unique. Based on all this, it really shouldn't be hard to see why Asgore is my second favorite boss battle in the game. Just barely beaten out by the one and only Omega Flower. Thanks everybody for watching, and stay tuned for the next episode, where I'll be analyzing Your Best Knight.